This is the Erasing Shame podcast, Season 3. Honest talk for healthy living, growing, and thriving.
Hello, everyone. This is Nancy Lee, your Season 3 co-host of Erasing Shame. We are erasing shame one story at a time. And today we have the privilege of having Danny Kim on our podcast. So everyone, welcome, Danny.
Hi.
Yeah, Danny and I actually know each other from ministry, and he actually was a trainer about strengths finders when I first met him through our ministry school. And he's gone on to do such amazing things, became a pastor of a church, and now has since then transitioned over to entrepreneurism and is an organizational consultant for, I believe your company's called Centauric. Yeah, pretty exciting stuff. I know you're doing workshops all over the country right now, and his specialty has shifted to shame and technology, or just technology in general. So I definitely wanted to bring him on today to highlight a lot of the different things in terms of our changing world with technology and how that really has a bigger impact on shame. So Danny, do you want to just, delve right into it and kind of talk about your history of how this all came about and where your interest lied in that?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here. I think you mentioned in my bio that I was a pastor before, and that's true. And it's interesting because when I was in that role, I always felt like God was kind of calling me outside the walls of the church. And for a long time, that was shame-inducing because it was this fear that, number one, the highest kind of form of spiritual vocation is being a pastor. And now I would have to tell my family that I was changing my career trajectory, which is a big thing to process with. But then also, too, it's interesting. It's a quick conversation stopper when I go to a party and say I'm an ex-pastor. And so I kind of use that as a launch pad to say, actually, my pastor, my parish really is in the business sector. It's in the companies that I get to work with and the people that I get to facilitate conversations for. And so that being said, I've been an organizational consultant for a couple of years now. And my role is to help leaders and organizations at pivotal moments to make the right moves. And that has very different forms, but one of the things that I decided to do a couple of years ago was also enroll into an industrial organizational psychology PhD program. And so part of my focus in that program is the impact of smartphone addiction on emotional intelligence. And there's a lot of research that's being done right now, but I'm particularly fascinated by the impact of technology in the workplace. And so it's a fun
topic. What are your thoughts on that? Because we hear a lot about, I'm sorry?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we hear a lot about different rules that are set with technology in the workplace. Are you for it? Are you against it?
It's a tricky thing. Every culture is different. Every company culture is different. And so I don't see that much going on in the workplace, surprisingly. From the people that I interact with, I mentioned my topic. We have a 30-minute discussion about it. And people are always like, man, I feel like we need to have a conversation at work. And so it's one of those things that is readily available, but rarely talked about, and I'm curious. I would love to continue to explore that with companies because I think what's happening as a result of the overload of technology is that we are actually in a place where I feel like we're not having the right kinds of conversations to be able to support technology use. So that's an interesting piece. That's kind of a side piece, or that's what I'm working on. But technology across all different kinds of conversations is a fascinating thing for me.
Awesome. Yeah, technology is such a big topic right now because everyone has it. It's definitely not going away. It's here to stay. What would you say are the big impacts of what we need to be careful as the world is moving more technologically in advancements and social media and everything is done online?
Yeah, interesting. I think the irony of technology, specifically the smartphone, is that it promises us greater productivity, greater connection, greater information and data. And yet I'm finding that it is actually creating the opposite outcome. So you see less productivity because people are spending way too much time on email when they're not actually getting work done, right? Instead of doing deep work, they're doing a lot of shallow work, for example. The other thing is I see that people are actually saying things on social media more readily than they would ever say to a person in front of them. I think that's a danger. And even the other day, I was on a podcast, got released, and there was somebody that doesn't know me but happened to be a part of this larger network, and the person commented in the Facebook post for this podcast, literally the same kind of podcast I was talking about, and they said, "Wow, it's crazy what people get paid to talk about." And it's like, well, first of all, I'm not getting paid to do these, I'm not getting paid to do my research right now. And he kind of diminished the topic, and that was shaming, that was like virtual shaming, literally. And I was so surprised because I was like, wow, like I know that to be true, but it was the first time I had actually received that shame message, online. And I'm like, would he have said that to my face? Like, I would be shocked if he had said that to me, if he knew who I was. He knew my character, so we have these judgments and assumptions, and we think we can kind of say whatever we want, thinking that it's not going to hurt anybody. And yet technology has incredible power, because guess what? It wasn't just me that saw it. It was thousands of people, perhaps, and so that was an interesting thing. And the other thing that I'm noticing, and would love to continue to delve into this, is this idea that we are trying our best to live and project an identity about who we are that isn't consistent with our true lives, our true self. And so I think it's a sad thing. And actually, Andy Crouch a few years ago wrote on Christianity Today an article called "The Return of Shame." And it's a fascinating article, but basically what he was saying was that, in the West, or Western kind of philosophy and thinking is the difference between guilt and innocence, right? Like, I want to be innocent versus I'm guilty. And in kind of Eastern or Asian thinking is often honor and shame, right? So this is what this podcast is all about. And he actually says that the return of shame comes in the form of technology. Because in the past, a decade ago, before we had smartphones that captured everything, but before it could get put on Snapchat or Instagram story or Facebook stories, if you did something, that was embarrassing in high school, it lived for a day. And then the next day, nobody thought about it ever again, right? But what's happening is, specifically in like adolescence, those that don't really know how to use technology or don't know the power and the damaging effects of technology, they can capture that embarrassing moment of somebody, and it will live for their entire high school career. And people will be saying things about them, they'll make fun of it, and I think that that's the power of technology, and unfortunately, that's the negative side of technology, right? And so he's arguing that there's this return of shame because we are living with this identity crisis, because one, we can't live up to the perfection that our Instagram feeds never will really fully satisfy, and two, we're seeking so much from other people, right? We have no personal identity that's rooted in God or rooted in something higher than ourselves. It's rather rooted in what everyone says about us, what we think that other people want us to be, and it's evaluated and determined by how many likes I get on Instagram, right? It's shaped. I mean, there's studies that actually, an article that came out that said women and young girls are actually trying to get physical surgery to look like their Snapchat filters, right? So it's literally changing our identity as like physical appearance, because we're like, I gotta look a certain way. And now that's a human thing, right? There's all these idols that we've always created, and yet I think technology is actually multiplying it and amplifying it, right? We now have a way to quantify that I have X amount of followers and X amount of people that liked what I presented to the world. And it's magnifying this kind of narcissism that we've always seen in all of humanity. And it's just it's just multiplied, and it's exponential, those challenges.
Wow, that's deep. We hear a lot about online bullying, all that different stuff. There are detriments of technology, but I think what you said earlier is there's somewhat of a dual identity for people who when you face them in reality and the person that they appear to be versus the person that they feel like they can be behind the camera, whether it's social media or a chat room or whatever. Would you have any thoughts further about that, of kind of this dual identity that people talk about or experience through technology?
Yeah, it's tough. I am not a proponent of being prescriptive, or telling people what to do or what not to do. Rather, I want to bring a sense of awareness for people. And I think one of the things that I can provide context for is, number one, asking the question, would I say this comment to this person's face? We are responsible for our actions. We are responsible for what we say and do physically. And we are also responsible for the texts that we type. And I think that we have to be mindful of the impact that it might have on people. Just this morning, I was on a group text with a small group, and it was interesting because there was some shaming going on in that. And it was kind of poking fun. It was like, oh, that's an excuse. And they threw like a funny gif of like Donald Trump rolling his eyes or something like that. And at first I laughed. But what happened was it made me think, that's like you don't get the tone that you get in a conversation. And I would just change the way people, I would have cautioned him before he texted that out, to consider the impact it would have. So number one, asking the question, what would I ask? Would I say this in front of somebody? The other thing that I might consider is asking yourself the question, do I find my value and worth from what other people say about me? And I think that's a good litmus test, because it's something that something that's always going to be a human part of us, finding identity in what other people say. And yet I would say that if you are going to the extremes of changing your reality to show a world something very different than who you are, I think that you may want to start asking the question, am I doing this because it makes me look a certain way? Am I trying to change my worth and my value? Am I finding my truest identity on this platform and what people say about me? It's so fascinating. The research is clear. People that spend more time on their phones than they wanted to always regret that they did. Right? So that means that even they're like, man, I just didn't even realize I was spending that much time. And I wish I didn't. I wish I didn't spend time scrolling through my social media feeds or looking at news or having this information overload that actually isn't helpful but harmful in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a reality. I've heard of, I forget what the story was, but somebody who got married with an online character, like an anime character. Yeah, it's gone as severe as people wanting to have their identity online and have relationships online. And so in terms of ministry, now we hear more and more people, actually pastors, who are meeting people in video games and chat rooms, because there's a lot of people that live their lives there. And also they're looking for connection. They're looking for it behind, characters that they're playing, or just to have some social outlet of like, everybody's in a chat room and I can just be free to be who I am here.
Yeah. It's really interesting because, something that I'm very cognizant of is that if you ever go to church, let's say even a church or like a gathering of people or a small group, and you find that you're not talking with somebody in that moment, ask yourself the question, do I feel tempted to grab my smartphone? And watch your behavior. And I catch myself doing that. I'm researching this thing, so I'm hyper aware of my actions and how I use my technology. But I have realized and I've noticed that people will jump on their phone because they are more confident or more comfortable on that platform than they are being eye to eye with somebody and seeing them for who they are. Now, the phone could be a place where you have your data or your ticket, or it's a place where you're maybe texting your parents or whatever, something important. So I'm not discouraging that. However, I am encouraging people to consider, how might I be more present with the people that are around me. And I'm not discouraging online dating. I'm not discouraging from people connecting through video games. I think that's fine. You just have to ask yourself, what reality am I living in? And what is real for me, and how might we be able to consider the ways in which technology doesn't put our best foot forward. And it's not living real. We do this all the time as humans. We live in false realities because our false realities are very easy to control, and they make us feel a lot better about ourselves, right? And it's not real. It's not real. We can fantasize all day, and that's why I say this is a human issue, not a technology issue. And there's this great movie called Ready Player One. I'm not sure if you've seen it. Maybe others. It's called Ready Player One, and it's
Ready Player One.
Yep.
Okay.
And it's based on a novel. But the idea is there's this whole virtual reality that's created. And in the future, people like you and me live in this virtual reality world. And it's this game. And at the very end of the game, the creator, you find, sorry, this is going to be ruin it for some people, but the creator actually has this fantastic quote. And he basically says, the reason why I created this game was because it was easier for me to live in virtual reality than it was to live in reality. Because relationships are challenging.
Yes.
And I think that's so powerful. Like, relationships and people have always been tricky. They always are hard. From the very beginning in Genesis with Cain and Abel even, right? Like, there's pride, there's jealousy, there's a desire to have what they have. There's a desire to be different, to stand out. All of these things that get in the way. And technology, unfortunately, in some ways can fuel that. It literally gives an amplifier to some of those symptoms that we've seen, and it gives us a voice, and it could be used in really challenging ways, And so I think it's easier in some ways to hide behind a phone to feel a false sense of connection than it is to actually engage in the people at work. It is to engage in my home with my parents, with my children even, right? Sometimes it's easier to throw an iPad in front of somebody, in front of your 4-year-old than it is to actually have conversations with them or try to play with them, right? Because you're maybe busy checking your emails for work or whatever that is. It's easier to go to church with 200 people in a congregation and for you to be looking at your phone, looking like you're doing something important on a Sunday morning. It's so much easier to do that than it is to actually turn to a neighbor and say, hey, I'm Danny. What's your name? How can I be praying for you? It's so much harder. And I think that is why technology is obviously ramping up, but also too, it's becoming a real barrier for people to have meaningful connection.
Yeah, I mean, I experience it all the time where I feel like there's people who go to church or are at meetings that I'm at, and because they don't know who else to talk to, they just hop on their phone. And for me, because I'm aware of that, I'll try to make an effort to kind of get to know the person, because that probably means that they don't really have a friend there.
Right.
And Simon Sinek had a video released maybe a year ago, and he says, it's so crazy how in America, we have all these meetings, and then let's just say someone's 5 minutes late, and then the leader of the host of the meeting will say, okay, we're 5 minutes late, and everyone will just be on their phone.
Yeah.
And then
they're connecting.
Then the meeting officially starts. But he was like, no, the whole message of connecting, we've missed the point. It's in that waiting that we should be connecting in person, not via technology and escaping what's right in front of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so much of us live in that world today. How would you say are ways that we can really balance that and just be more cognizant of it? Because obviously there's a lot of problems associated with it, but there's also benefits to having technology, and then just us having an awareness of that.
So I'll talk first about kind of ways we can maybe become more aware and social codes we can change to kind of help limit or curb our use. And then the other side is we'll talk about maybe ways in which I've seen it being really effective or productive or powerful, right? Yeah. So, being an Asian American, my home was always a shoe-free zone. right? You always put your shoes in the front of the, before you walk in, you got to keep it nice and clean. Sometimes you have like indoor slippers. And for my wife, that's not so much because she's Caucasian. So, but the point is, I wonder if there'll be a day when there's going to be a box where we put all our phones in the basket before we walk into someone's home. And I know people are going to like say, no, well, Danny, like what if my child calls me or the babysitter calls me and I need my phone? That's fine. I get it. I understand. But I did this actually with my community group a few months ago, and we tried it. We were having a dinner and a meal together, and I said, hey, I'm doing some research. Would you mind putting your phones in this basket for me? And everyone put it in, and within 30 minutes, without my prompting, they all started talking about the impact of technology. And that was maybe the first time some of them had a meaningful conversation about their technology use. And all of them admittedly said, yeah, I kind of scroll on Instagram longer than I should, or man, I feel like I'm always connected to work, or when I'm having a meeting with my manager, he or she just doesn't give me the time of day because they're stuck on their phone rather than meeting with me. There's all these conversations that emerge. So I would say that, or I dream of a day, when we are forced in some ways, I don't like to use that word, but we are invited to put our phones in baskets or in places where they could be shut off temporarily. I know there's some tech startups that are trying to do this by having like Wi-Fi where actually like their like modem will shut off at a certain time and they'll shut off certain zones of the house so that it can kind of it will naturally be a way of saying, hey, okay, it's 5 o'clock in the evening. I'm going to disconnect, whatever that is, The other thing that I might invite people is if you're a leader of a small group or a leader at a church of something, I would say we need to begin to talk about it more. It's kind of the elephant in the room, right? We know that it's a challenge. We know, but we don't talk about it, right? And I'm not saying to throw the baby out with the bathwater in some ways, or say, okay, everyone just dump your smartphone in the in the river or whatever. But what I am inviting them to think about is how might you incorporate that in your messaging, in your conversations in small groups? How might your smartphones become an awareness where we say, you know what, how can I become more aware of this? And how do I stay present? When I'm hanging out with my kids at the playground, do I need to be on my phone? I know it feels weird. It's going to start feeling awkward for people, but they might leave their phones in the car for just a little bit, or leave it at home altogether. When you're doing work at your desk, you may consider turning your phone off altogether and putting it in a drawer, because science shows that when we're distracted, it takes about 15 minutes to get back into the zone. And so every text message that comes through, every little notification that pops up, every little buzz and bling and, light that shines, it's just distracting us. It's distracting us, and we're not human doings. We're human beings. And I would encourage people to say, how can I just be fully present, fully engaged with where I am today, And on the flip side, let's talk about some of the pros, perhaps. Like, what could we do to just harness our technology? Number one, I use my phone a lot, specifically to text people in my life that I'm thinking about and praying for. And I've actually had some friends tell me, like, Danny, you're really intentional. Even though we can't meet up every week or whatnot, like, I'm texting them, I'm praying for them, I'm just saying, hey, how are you doing? And that's actually a form of connection. It's meaningful. It's not through Instagram. It's not giving them a shout out on my, Facebook post. Although I could do that, but rather I'm trying to be more intentional, saying, hey, these are the people that I actually want to connect with. Actually, Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook is starting to do this too. He's trying to create a platform. He's turning Facebook, or so he says, I don't know how this is going to turn out, but he's shifting Facebook from like a mass media outlet to more of intimate connections. So you're going to have less and less connections, but more intimate connections. So there's a trend moving towards that. I think this pendulum swung one way, by trying to get so many thousands of followers. And I think we're seeing a pendulum swing back where technology is going to become more intimate, like a WhatsApp, where it's like, these are the real people I want to connect with. The rest, not so much. Not 3,000 people don't need to see what I ate for lunch yesterday. But there are people that I do want to get connected with, or whatnot. The other thing that I've seen it do is, people use Instagram and social media like LinkedIn to actually make meaningful connections. I would just consider, how are you using that technology? Why do you need it? And how often are you on it? And how are you using that to actually provide value to the world? Podcasts are amazing. I use that, so again, it's not about just like throwing out the phone. It's about saying, what do I need it for? And is it really benefiting and adding value to my life? Or is it actually taking away from my kind of conversations and people? Yeah, so I don't know if there's any questions that you have on that, but that's kind of some of the ways
Yeah.
that I shift.
Yeah. I think about it because I'm a financial planner, and we think about money, and some people have this lie that like money is evil, and it's not the money per se, but it's
Mhm.
like the love of money. And so whatever you don't master will master you,
Yeah.
right? And the same idea with technology, where it's so easy to get lost in that. And if we don't have an intention, right, to decide in advance what the purpose of my Facebook account is or for my phone, then we can easily get lost through addiction, right? And then
Absolutely.
there's a lot of mental health stuff, and then this lack of social connection. And it's so easy for us to come together in person nowadays, and everyone's just on their phone at the dining table, and then we're
Yeah.
really not connecting overall, in person.
Yeah.
There's actually some things I've seen where there's weddings that they've said there's a rule that they have to put phones in a box, because
Yeah.
not just for the sake of everyone shouldn't be on their phone, but because it looks terrible for wedding photos, and there's
Yeah.
a reason that they hire professional photographers. And so it just has that appearance, right, as well as like a deeper layer of the internal lack of connection. But I think of also our families when we were growing up. There was such a disconnect from our immigrant parents because they
Mhm.
didn't know how to relate with us, so they automatically just tossed us in front of a TV for like 8 hours a day, because
Yeah.
home and being obedient and just staying indoors, right? That was considered what was good, as opposed to like going out and having sports or recreation or student activities.
Yeah.
So just because we're behind a screen and we're not doing anything, there's also a lot of harm in that, because the mental shut off, we're not utilizing our brain, exercising our creativity or learning or curiosity. So there's so many things to really think about. I guess for me, I just personally, I deal with anxiety.
Mm.
And I've, in this last month, had to make a decision to not be on my phone a lot, because I was realizing how much I was trying to do in every given moment,
Mm.
and living in the future, which is where anxiety lives, right? Just trying to multitask, trying to put my thoughts on paper as I'm sitting in a lecture or, in a meeting, and I'm thinking about 10 other things that's happening tomorrow.
Yeah.
And being present, like you said, being
Mm.
present has been the key, right? The reminder that I have to remind myself of, like, nope, I have to enjoy what's in front of me. Don't worry about the next day, and don't worry about, like, what's going to happen, even if I don't get it on paper, right? It's just going to be what it is, and I'm going to be totally okay with where I'm at, because I also have had to deal with perfection and making sure that everything is right.
Yep.
So not putting those expectations on myself, and it's
Mm.
helped a lot. So being present, I'd say, is really something that today our world really needs to hear that message more and more. So definitely do that.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. You're right. Absolutely. Like this false sense of multitasking gives us this like belief that we can have control over many different things at the same time. And I could be writing an email and texting somebody and looking on Instagram and, doing all these things, doing our taxes and all this stuff at the same time. Right. And I think we just have to remember that we are finite beings, and our task and our role is to be fully present, and it goes back to the idea that we not only are narcissistic, we have this internal bent towards like being loved, obviously, and that's a good thing. It's like where you choose to find your love from is the other question. But the other thing is that we have this false belief that we can control everything, and there's this false narrative that we have that it's like I can master my own destiny, and that's what technology in some ways is promising us, but it fails miserably, right? It can't do everything for you, and we have to apologize, and we're going to make mistakes, and we're not going to be able to get everything done on time, and so What are the different applications for your technology, and how is it helping you, not hindering you? And what are ways in which you're going to think smarter about it, not let it become, overwhelming for you or change the way you live. And I think that's just really important thing to consider. And I think when it comes to shame, I think that the interesting and ironic thing about the smartphone is that specifically that it is a place for us to hide.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is we have this false sense of a false belief that we can, use our phones for to connect with people and get things done and be connected to our boss, etc. And yet, it's actually a place where we only show our best, and it's a place that says, "I can control what you see." And I think that's like a huge part of shame. It's like, I will only show what I want you to think about me and see about me, and I will control your perception of me. It's why, like, back in the days when I was driving to church with my family, and like we were like yelling at each other, and it was like I was crying in the back and everything. And then as soon as we get out of the van, like at church, like we were the perfect Kim family. You know what I mean? And there was all this like, hey, we're good, like everything's great. And I knew that my parents were going through a lot of stuff. They were like arguing and yelling and like, and I was like, what is happening? I'm going back and forth between what is real and what is made up. And I think the phone does the exact same thing. I could be having a fight with my wife, and yet on Instagram says, wow, look at a great workshop that I just presented in front of 50 people. And I love this. It's like, okay, like how is that making me feel, and what's really happening deep inside? And so I just want to encourage people that one of the things they might want to consider when it comes to smartphone and technology specifically is, who are the people you're truly connecting with? And are you able to create real conversations, a space for real conversation where you can say, hey, this is what I'm struggling with. I mean, you've been saying I've been struggling with anxiety. That's huge, for you to share with people. And do you have people in your life that you're having conversations saying, this is where I'm struggling? One of the invitations I had from my small group last week was, we're just talking about what gets in our way of like Sabbath rhythms and such. And I actually said my challenge that I need to work through, that I'm working on right now, is saying no. And saying no to things, to invitations, to people, not because I'm trying to be a jerk, but because my default is saying yes. And all these extracurricular activities are actually taking my time. And so celebrating with my community and telling them that I'm saying no. And that even means no to technology on my Sabbath, and saying, hey, I'm just going to pause for a moment and just kind of get that out of my system, because guess what? Instagram will be there tomorrow. My emails will be there tomorrow. My work will be there tomorrow, and things I need to accomplish and take care of will be there tomorrow. And so I just think, I'm just going to invite people to consider what are the things in their lives that they need to pull back from in order to feel more connected with people, to feel more connected about being authentic with themselves, and then ultimately that they might be able to connect with God or something bigger than themselves, right? Being present for the people around them, not being consumed by their ability to be productive or to try to control things or to show a world who they think they want other people to think about them, And I know it's kind of weird to think about, but that's what's happening, right? And that's what creates pain, is because like, we can't be vulnerable. We can't be who we are. We can't be like, this is who I am. I'm authentic. This is all of me. Rather, this is my made-up self, and this is what the caption says about me with hashtags. And like, that's what we want people to believe, about us. And so I just would love to see people become more authentic on social media, to become more connected in person, and then to use social media in our phones in a positive way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you talked about equating likes, right, as our form of recognition now, and people are just seeking likes. But I've even heard that it's biologically, like, something happens in our brain.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a drug, right, where it's almost
a
like
dopamine hit. Yep.
Dopamine.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so when the first thing people seek in the morning when they look at their phone is, right, their Facebook or email, which is me, I'm guilty. Yeah. We have to guard that first hour and last hour of the day, so that we actually come in having more control over that technology versus just immediately waking up with it and just falling into that abyss and allowing it to take us. So yeah, these are different things that I've kind of heard over the years as well. And I'm so grateful that you're getting to talk about it more, because it's something that we definitely want to start spreading the message, because technology, I think, has taken us so far, but now, like you said, it's kind of on that pendulum where it needs to kind of start scaling back to what's human behind it, so that people can find more spaces to connect. And I think one last thing I wanted to highlight is, so people hide behind shame or hide behind technology because they have shame, because maybe they don't know how to connect. Right? And it's not just an easy sort of fix, because you said relationships are hard. A lot of my family, right, we just have technology because we don't know how to connect with our parents. So all the boys grew up with just nothing but computers and locked up in their room. What would you say about learning how to connect, not just with yourself more, right? So being present, but kind of being able to escape and being able to better connect with people.
Wow, it's tough. Yeah. So if you are an adult, the onus is on you. Like, you are responsible for your technology use, right? So as an adult, we have to become examples for future generations. I'm doing my research right now because I'm anticipating the next generation in the workplace. And there's already impacts, right? Like, I didn't grow up with a smartphone. I didn't get a smartphone until I was like 22 or something like that, right? And
call us the Oregon Trail generation,
exactly,
right?
I was the Oregon Trail generation. Actually, so I was looking at my old junior high yearbook, and it said, "Hey, keep in touch," from Katie, and it said phone number, which was her home phone, and then it said pager number, and it had her pager number, and I was like, "Dang!" Like, there was no cell phone number, right? And I was like, but now it's like junior high, you're like, you've had a smartphone for like 4 years already, right? Like, and it's so interesting to me, like, just the world is changing, and so we have to become really careful of it. And you bring up a good point, like dopamine hits and stuff like that. Like, at least, so smartphone addiction is classified as a behavioral addiction, which is like equivalent to like gambling and shopping, right? The extremes of it. And the same things that are happening neurochemically speaking in your body when you are behaviorally addicted is the same as substance abuse. And so think about, like, at least with like cigarettes or drugs, like it's illicit, or you have an age when you can start, like even alcohol, right? There's a certain age before you can get that. Now kids are getting smartphones. If that's the same kind of stuff that's happening neurochemically, they're getting their smartphones at 8 years old. Yeah, right? And you're getting Facebook at 11. I don't know. I mean, I don't have teenagers, but like, imagine the impact that it's having on them, right? And how that is shaping their brains physiologically and neurologically. And so I would say, if you're a parent, this is the most important conversation you need to begin to have with them. You need to be aware of their smartphone usage, and you need to starting to have conversations, not to just say, okay, stop checking your phone, but tell them the why. Say, hey, like, I want to connect with you. I want to be present with you. I want to talk about your day. I want to look you in the eye and give you a hug, and say, how was your day? Like, I know that sounds so basic, but maybe we have to go back to the basics, And I wonder if parents aren't doing that because they just want to be on their phones themselves, right? They're watching Netflix and they're checking their emails at 8:30 at night, and they're like, all right, go play your Xbox and go do your thing. And it's easier, right? It's so much easier. And so my great caution and invitation for families and parents is say, let's bring that back. Let's get human connection, because that's where it starts. We can't expect our kids to be connecting with future employers or students or classmates if we can't even do it within and model it within our homes. You know what I mean? And so there is a great opportunity there, and I look forward to really seeing how these kinds of conversations might help equip people in the days to come with their technology use.
Yeah, awesome. Good stuff, Danny.
Yeah.
Well, that wraps up our time right now. And I know that you're up to a lot of big things. If people do want to continue to stay connected with you and all the work that you're doing, what's a good place for them to go to?
So this is so ironic that you're asking me this, because I actually gave a talk one time with a couple hundred people on this very topic, and I actually had them put their phones away. And the result was that I didn't get any social media love, which is really funny. It's like I'm killing my own reputation, like socially, like social media wise, because I'm like, hey, disconnect from your phone. And even podcasts that I've put out, people are like, hey, like, listen to this podcast, but then turn off your phone, or listen to this podcast before you turn off your phone or something like that. So anyways, I love to stay connected. I love joining the conversation. People can connect with me on my website at DannyKim with 2Ms.com. So it's DannyKim with 2Ms.com. And then also Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, I'm all on there with Danny Kims with 2Ms. That's kind of my social media handle, on Twitter as well. Am I on it all the time? Not all the time. I'm on it, and I love to connect with people if they're interested in my research and what I'm up to.
Awesome. Well, that wraps up today's episode of Erasing Shame, one story at a time. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today.
Thank you for being a part of Erasing Shame. Please rate and review on iTunes, subscribe on YouTube, and like on Facebook. Share with your friends and followers. Get all the details at erasingshame.com.